Hello and welcome back to the best of Rslash. Today we're taking a look at Rslash entitled Parents, where OP slams her entitled aunt's head in the door. This story has been posted by Shy Girl Turned Sassy. My crazy entitled aunt, whom you all know so well by now, had an annoying habit to just storm in when I was changing my clothes. The door would be closed, and if it wasn't locked, she would just let herself in. My protests that I may be in a state of undress fell on deaf ears, as did any instance that she knocked before entrance, like a civilized human being. The following incidents happened when I was either 18 or 19. Aunt and her husband were over for a visit. I was in my room, changing my clothes. My bedroom door had a small defect. It wouldn't lock properly. So anytime it was closed, my dad, stepmom, and brother would either knock or ask if they could come in. Not entitled aunt, of course. She considered herself above such frivolous courtesies. She could come into rooms as and when she saw fit, and mere mortals would just have to live with it. Unfortunately for her, this mere mortal had had enough of her privacy being invaded. My top was off, and when I heard the door begin to creak open, I yelled, "I'm changing! Wait outside!" As expected, Aunt didn't listen and was about to stick her head in when I swiftly reached the door, pulled it back a little, and slammed it hard into Aunt's thick skull. Not enough to crack her skull, but enough to hurt. Aunt let out a howl that instantly brought a smile to my face. She went downstairs whining. I followed. She yelled at my dad about what I had done. My dad and uncle, Aunt's husband, were drinking at the time and were uncharacteristically chilled. Dad looked at her, then looked at me and said something like, "Yeah, don't do that." My uncle burst out laughing, as if his wife getting her head banged was the funniest thing he had ever heard. Such dismissal of her grievances was too much to bear for my aunt. She demanded that they leave immediately. Uncle told her he was in no condition to drive. Besides, he and my dad were going to watch a cricket match, so leaving was out of the question. Aunt dialed my cousin's number, believing wholeheartedly that her son would come to her aid. But judging from her end of the conversation, cousin was out with his friends and wasn't going to drive all the way over to deal with her stupid ass, and why couldn't she just stop getting into unnecessary squabbles? Aunt had no options left. She just sat down on the couch while holding against her head the ice pack my stepmom had brought for her. Her anger was boiling over but was completely ignored by my happy dad and uncle. It was a lovely evening. This story has been posted by PW Crash. Backstory. For most of my life, I was raised by my grandfather. Nothing was wrong with my family life or anything. Just a few sets of circumstances that's a whole other story in itself. We live in a suburban area surrounded by woods, and he owns about 10 acres into the woods, with the boundaries clearly marked by stone walls. One of these stone walls separated my grandfather's land from a cul-de-sac, and up until now, we had zero problems with any of them. In fact, my grandfather was usually more than happy to give permission to neighbors who politely asked him to use his land, given they had a good reason. One of these neighbors had asked my grandfather if he could dump the sticks and leaves in his yard over the stone wall. My grandfather agreed, as he rarely uses that part of the property anyways. This will be important later. My grandfather is very healthy for his age and still strong as an ox. That being said, he has a few minor health issues, including vertigo spells, so I've been trying to help him around the yard more and more, as well as just to stay active outside away from crowds with the virus going around. Recently, I've started the project of cleaning up the underbrush around the wooded area. A large pine tree had fallen a few months before and almost hit one of the porches in the cul-de-sac. My grandfather cut up the tree and removed the pieces in the neighbor's yard, but it was too deep in the woods to pull them out with the tractor. This led to me going back to that pine tree and trying to clear a path back to the house from there. I was behind the stone wall, cutting and pulling up saplings when I hear the glass door of the cul-de-sac house open and an angry lady storming out onto the porch in a bathrobe. She was much younger than a typical Karen. I would say mid-20s. Entitled mother says, "What are you doing? You can't be here." Why not? "Because you're trespassing, dumbass. You think you can just hang out in the woods behind my house with my kids inside? Get the f*** out before I call the cops." At this point, I'm just looking at her trying to figure out what to say. I mean, I get it. It can be a little weird seeing someone in the woods behind your house if you haven't seen them before. "Ma'am, I'm sorry if I scared you, but my family owns this part of the woods. I'm just cleaning up back here. Remember me and my grandfather were back here a few months ago to take care of that tree that fell down? I just need to clear a path so we can get it out of here." At this point, I thought it was purely a misunderstanding. "Don't be ridiculous. Those were laborers my boyfriend's dad hired. You don't own the land. My boyfriend's dad owns all this," gestures with her hand. "Now I'll tell you one more time to get out of here before I call the cops." Now I'm thinking I might be dealing with a genuine idiot, as outside our property boundaries, the woods are owned by the town water plant and don't have public access. But I'm also taken aback that she referred to us as laborers. Guess you're going to have to call the cops then, because I ain't moving. I don't care what you, your boyfriend, or your boyfriend's dad says. I shrug as I lean back against the wall and pull out my phone to call my grandfather to tell him where I was. He tells me he'll be there in a few minutes and to hang tight. She then dramatically proceeds to call 911 and tells them there's a shady individual on her property refusing to leave, and she's afraid for her life. I start getting nervous at this point, even though all I have on me is a hooked branch cutter. So I call the police non-emergency number, briefly explain the situation as just a land dispute that got out of hand and that I am unarmed and waiting on my own property. And that I have never left my own property. He assured me that it would be settled when the officers arrive, which didn't help my nerves. Just then, I hear my grandfather pull up and see him walking through the yard towards us. What? Stay back! You can't come into my yard! Grandfather growls. Keep your mouth shut, you dumb broad. He growled as he walked over to me and climbed over the wall so he was on my side. Now who the hell do you think you are, and why are you yelling at my granddaughter? My boyfriend's dad owns all this, and both of you are going to get arrested for trespassing. My grandfather let out a dramatic, indignant laugh. Oh, did he tell you that? Well, you're in for quite the shock, and your boyfriend's dad is in for quite the talk. After them yelling back and forth for a few minutes, 2 cop cars pulled up and 3 officers come walking into the yard. As soon as they do, she starts screaming again about how we have no right to be in the woods behind her house where we can see her kids inside. Cop 1 looks at Grandpa and says, Sir, do you own the property behind this wall? Yes, sir, I do. Pulls out his wallet to show his address. Cop 1, eyeing his license, Sir, this address is for down the street. I interrupt and say, correct. But if you look on Google Maps, it shows the property boundaries on that address reach out through the woods and end at this wall. I hand him my phone, which already has Google Maps open showing our exact location within the boundary of the property. Cop 2 replies, yep, she's right. So what were you all doing back here if you don't mind me asking? We explained the situation of the tree and how we were working to remove the remnants. Meanwhile, the other officer was taking a statement from entitled mother. I know the owner of this house. He's a good guy. I give him permission to dump his leaves and stuff behind the wall. But I've never seen her before, so I don't know where she got those crazy ideas. But I'm definitely going to have a talk with Frank when he gets home. Cop 1 then says, she already called him up, and he's on his way now. Do you mind sticking around for a little until he gets here? Sure, we got nothing to do. The cops walked us to my grandfather's truck, where we waited about 10 minutes for Frank to pull in. When he did, he immediately walked over to the truck. Frank calls my grandfather by his first name and calls me. What's going on? Was someone hiding out in the woods? Are you okay? Did you see him? To clarify, we have had an issue in the past with people running from cops and hiding in our woods. It took a second for us to realize he thought that maybe entitled mother saw one, and we came to chase him out. Not exactly. At this point, 2 cops are around us again. But being 2 old guys who obviously pose zero threat, they're noticeably relaxed and kind of let them talk it out. Frank explains that entitled mother is his granddaughter's mother, and his son had made some mistakes, and currently both were staying with him while they try to find a place of their own. He thinks that maybe his son told him some lies to make him look better. My grandfather then says, well, I hate to say it, but your son made some big mistakes. She's crazy. Oh, you have no idea. The other cop is still talking to entitled mother, who won't stop screaming about not wanting us being able to see into the living room, especially my grandfather, a creepy old man. My blood is boiling at this point. My grandpa is the type of person who would gladly throw his life away to save a child. Any child, even a stranger's. Frank heard this too and ordered entitled mother inside at once. He told the cops he needed to have a talk with both her and his son about their living situation, but they might want to remain nearby in case she tries to call again for whatever reason. Me and my grandfather are given the clear to go, but leave our contact information. Found out later that week that entitled mother was getting evicted for a number of reasons, with this little incident being the last straw. He's also filing for custody of his granddaughter because entitled mother refuses to get a job, yet still has money for weed, yet keeps asking Frank for money to take care of his granddaughter. I really feel bad for her in this situation, but I have no sympathy for entitled mother whatsoever. Entitlement at its best. Dark Ballmonk replies in the comments. My friend had a couple poachers on his property hunting outside of the season. They were firing their rifle in the middle of the night, said friend got nervous, some assholes were shooting about and gonna accidentally hit his house. Well, an old man who lived down the dirt road also owned property there. I'm not sure how or why, but he ended up shooting one of them in the leg when they wandered into his property. Later, they came back suing the old man. Unfortunately, they based it on the fact that they were on public property. What? Well, short story, Old Man's legal counsel submitted the paperwork to show the property boundaries, shooting guns during a time that none of the animals on the property should be within season, and that the two idiots left a cooler full of beer behind with their prints all over it. You've been listening to the best of Rslash. If you like what we're doing, please leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing because we release content like this every single day on both YouTube and podcasts.